Great. Good morning, everybody. And I'm Joyce Elliott, and my co-sponsor, Les Warren, cannot be here this morning. I don't think at this point. He might be able to dial in later, but it's time for us to go ahead and get started. And always when we have any of these sessions, one of us has to always be here. He and I are the two people who were the lead sponsors for this legislation, just in case, I need to say that again to remind us what we are here about. Because working with Arkansans for the arts and having these boot camps around the state to try to learn more about Arkansas's possibilities for the creative economy. Les and I, my co-chair and I, know that there are real possibilities. We have known that. We didn't quite know how to, as we used to always say in debate, reify something and make it real. And so that's how we got connected with Arkansans for the arts to help us make it real. And this boot camp today, though, is one that is a lot of it is the genesis of what we started talking about early on about the creative economy being something that is going to be helpful throughout the state. And there's no way we can do that without doing two things. We need to just reimagine the way we look at our state and see possibilities where there have not been any before, and where we have seen them, think about them more in a more democratic way. And that democratic way, though, also calls on us to think more about what we actually mean by the arts, and then connect that to technology, how we can really make some headway with the creative economy around the state. And then the second thing is that we haven't had a chance to talk about a great deal, but one of the things we talked about with Arkansans for the Arts and in our art caucus, to a degree, we can't be successful unless we're making sure we are aware and acting on the principles of DEI. And that's a difficult thing many times to talk about, but there is no such thing going forward in this country or the world unless we are actively open and honest and doing things the right way by making sure we do have that diversity, and inclusiveness that we sometimes don't have, not because we don't intend to, but because we've not been intentional. And the only way we're going to be able to make sure that we get what we know we can from the creative economy is making sure that we are observing the principles of DEI. And we have so many people, for example, who are artists in ways I'd never thought about. That kind of thing needs to be included, and so I really appreciate and I'm excited, Erin, about and Lenore, about what you've done to get us together today to talk about this subject matter. And I guess for legislators, Tippy and I are the legislators on here, so we might have to carry a lot of the water, Representative McCullough, to help people understand arts and the intersection of the principles of DEI. So I'll turn it over to you, Erin, and we'll go ahead and get started. We can see everybody's name, but just so that we all are communicating, and when you ask a question, I have something to say. If you would just tell us with whom you're connected, that would be really useful. Okay, so over to you, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts in Arkansas. Arkansans for the Arts wants to thank everyone for being here, thanking Senator Elliott and Representative McCullough for being here, and also thanks to Representative Warren for your leadership in the boot camps and in the arts in Arkansas. Real quick, I just want to remind everyone to stay muted. We heard some background noise earlier. That will make it easier for everyone to hear. Also, you probably heard at the beginning that the meeting is being recorded. So if at any time you would like to be removed from the recording, or if later in the Q&A, you'd rather not stay on that recording, just send us a note or put a message in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can edit you out of this video. That way you're able to be as candid as you need to be. So moving forward, I want to introduce our facilitator today. Our facilitator is Adrienne Collins. She's the Director of HR and DEI for Rock Region Metro, and owner of AC Productions, an HR and DEI consulting firm in Little Rock. She has over 20 years of human resource management experience, and the last 17 has been with the Armed Forces, nonprofit, and telecommunications. She holds a master's degree in management information technology and business administration from Webster University and bachelor's degrees in criminology, Spanish, and sociology from A-State. Adrienne will also be presenting later this morning, but I would like to welcome Adrienne. Take it away.
Welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited to see faces and names, so I hope that you guys enjoy the program and we'll just move it right along. So today's conversation is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We will hear from presenters about the language and the vocabulary in DE&I discussions and how DE&I has entered the business community and why DE&I is critical to the arts in our state. We have scheduled a brief Q&A session at the end, but feel free to use the chat function within Zoom throughout the presentation. If you have a question or two or leave a comment, we're welcome to that. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first presenter, who is Lauren Wilson. Lauren is the Assistant Director of the Multicultural Center at University of Arkansas at Little Rock. In her role, Wilson is responsible for implementing cultural programming for Black History Month and Hispanic Heritage Month. She also coordinates several programs designed to help students succeed, including several student affairs diversity initiatives, the Summer Bridge Academy and the Trojan Lead Program, which is designed to prepare first and second year students of color for leadership in the U of A of Little Rock community. Lauren holds a master's degree in higher education from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. I'd like to welcome Lauren Wilson.
Thank you, Adrienne, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see your faces or the boxes with your names in them. Today, I'm really just here to give you an overview of what DEI is. As Adrienne said, I work in the Multicultural Center. I work primarily with students, and every now and then someone asks, oh, can you do a DEI training with my student group? And I'm like, well, sure, but it's not really going to be training. It's going to be more of an introduction in hopes that this conversation will continue in whatever work you have those students doing. And the best way I think to do that is just to start off with definitions and making sure that everyone is on the same page. The reason I got invited to this conversation is because I wrote an op-ed entitled Diversity is the Minimum. I think a lot of times when we hear DEI, we just think diversity and not necessarily about the EI, or, you know, we kind of use those terms diversity, equity, and inclusion interchangeably. But one of the things I just, you know, I always like the table metaphor. It's pretty simple to visualize, but diversity is the minimum, because with diversity, you're just making sure that there are different people at the table, people who have different identities, who have different life experience from each other, and they're just there at the table, and that's it. Equity is when you actually start to make accommodations for those people. And one of the things that I always make sure to focus on is that equity does not mean equality. Even though those are very similar, equality actually is not necessarily the best thing, because that just means that everyone gets the exact same thing. And we know that, you know, depending on folks' identities, their struggles they may have, life experiences, there are certain people who need more, or just certain people who need different accommodations. So equity is making sure that everyone at the table gets exactly what they need. So like if I'm allergic to shrimp, you don't put shrimp on my plate, even if everybody else is eating shrimp. Simple to think about that. And then inclusion is just making sure that you didn't throw the not shrimp on my plate because, oh my gosh, like you're allergic to shrimp. How dare you be different from all these other folks who eat shrimp? So inclusion is just making sure that once you get these different folks to the table, once you give them what they need, they actually feel included and not like they're being, you know, talked down to, not like they're being just given handouts just because, but that they feel like they actually are included and belong at that table. You can also think of it not even just as food, but as far as voices. So especially especially today, as we're having a conversation, we really want to make sure that we're cognizant of whose voices are we hearing, and does everyone actually feel welcome to bring their voice, or are they just like, oh, well, I'm at this table, but I'm not necessarily comfortable with speaking up. So anytime that we, you know, we make sure when we're having these conversations, each one of those are very important. There's subtle distinctions between each one, but each one of them really work in tandem to make sure that everyone is at the table, gets what they need, and is included. And another thing that I like to note when I'm talking to folks about DEI is, sorry, my daughter's behind me, full transparency. It's one of my identities as a mom. I'm having to bring her to work today. But one of the things that I like to talk about as far as identities is just to keep in mind that regardless of what you see on the outside when you're looking at a person, that is just a very small indicator of all the different identities that they hold, whether they're external, what you think you see, or internal. I know a lot of times being from Arkansas, I'm from Crossett, Southeast Arkansas, and I went to school in Fayetteville, opposite side of the state. I felt like I was in another country. Those of you who know, you know, like it's a very stark difference. And being in Little Rock now in a metropolitan area, the most metropolitan area in the state, I think about that a lot. Like, you know, kind of country bumpkins like me, that's their first time being in kind of a bigger city. How does that impact their university experience? Thinking about folks from different types of family structures, of course, race, gender, ability. Those are the things we often think about with diversity. It's just like, oh, black and white race. But it's so much more complex than that. So if you want to think, you know, why is this conversation relevant to you? Just think about all the different identities that you hold, and then just remember that every single person you interact with also holds several identities that are all working together to shape the experience that they're having. So even if you're at the same table, even if you share a couple of identities with that person, there are still going to be some parts of it that's going to make y'all unique to each other and not exactly the same. And then with identities, that also goes into making assumptions. So I think the biggest thing and the most important thing, or one of the most important things that I can leave you with, is just to never assume anything about someone's identity or their experiences. A lot of times people think I'm younger than I am. I won't say my age because I guess that's not like appropriate, but suffice it to say that I am an actual grown up. And a lot of times working on a college campus, I get mistaken for a student, not for an actual employee who knows several things about this university. And so, but I actually being an employee here, I have made a lot of assumptions, you know, at UA Little Rock having a lot of non-traditional students. And so I've gone up to older folks and be like, oh, are you faculty staff? They're like, oh, I'm a student. I'm so sorry. So I tell y'all that anecdote to say, you're never going to get it completely right. You never get to a point where, oh, I am a DEI perfecto. Like I'm always going to get it right. That's not the point, and that's not reality. The point really is that you are trying, that you are making the effort, that you are recognizing why DEI is necessary to this conversation and to other conversations in the state, and that you just keep making the effort to bring folks to the table, give them what they need, and to make them feel included and welcome. And I will be more than glad to answer any questions at the ends. And I thank y'all for bringing me in today.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We appreciate all the information that you gave us. So I will be presenting next, and I'm here to talk about DE&I and economic sustainability for businesses. So studies have shown the power that representation can have on business decisions and the effects that it can have on the bottom line. And in today's society, representation can't not be an afterthought. It must be part of your strategy in everyday life. While most public sector agencies don't have a bottom line, they have a mission and they have a duty to the communities that they and their employees serve. With the recent release of the Executive Order 13985 and the subsequent release of Executive Order on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility in the federal workforce, government agencies are being asked to conduct assessments and show strategic approaches around DE&I initiatives. The executive order says that entrenched disparities in our laws and public policies and our public and private institutions have often denied equal opportunity to individuals and communities. To improve representation in government, agencies should expand their listening strategies to encompass the full spectrum of diversity present in their communities and pursue comprehensive approaches for equity of all. And by doing this, agencies can also improve their customer experience by ensuring that they represent all citizens equally and fairly. Some steps that businesses can take: they need to engage in active listening. This sounds fancy, but it's really just plain old sitting down, having the conversation, and listening mixed with action. If you want to serve your people better, you need to ask them what they want and then act. Another tip: empower your employees. Your employees are the people who engage with customers every single day. We have to embrace and foster the customer experience. We have to empower them to make the right decisions. Instead, create a dialogue with your employees to ensure that the policy fits the organization. Consumers expect more from their brands and companies, and they're embracing social values in light of social movements. You cannot be a performative ally. If you're going to talk the talk, then you need to walk the walk. Companies should also focus on building trust. Without trust, it's easy to mistake any company or government action as an overreach. Once a portion of the community feels alienated, agencies can never give a true holistic view of the citizens they represent because the data will misrepresent the population. And lastly, but not least, think like a brand. If you're in a public sector, continue to gather diverse opinions and perspectives and foster innovation to help your agency redesign programs in a way that it will be valuable and equitable for everyone. And like Lauren said earlier, I will also be here after if you have any questions in regards to economic sustainability in your businesses, and excited to facilitate this talk with you guys. And moving forward, I will present the next presenter. Is Margie on the call? Let me see.
I am now.
Okay, awesome. All right, our next presenter is Margie Johnson-Reese. Margie has a 30-year portfolio as an arts advocate and arts management professional. She received a BA from Washington State University and an MFA in theater from Trinity University in San Antonio. She is an advisor to the International Council of African Museums based in Nairobi, Kenya, and is a fellow at the Salzburg Global Institute in Salzburg, Austria, and a longtime board member of Americans for the Arts. Margie has also served as the Director of Office of Cultural Affairs for the City of Dallas, as well as the General Manager for the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. Margie is currently partnering with Mid-America Arts Alliance, bringing her expertise in arts administration to help guide MAAA in its work toward achieving the equity and inclusion goals and objectives of its strategic plan. Priorities include building a racially diverse workforce, providing professional development and coaching for the staff and board, and also supporting the infusion of inclusive and anti-racist practices throughout the organization's internal and external service delivery. Margie is joining us today from Nebraska, where she's attending the Mid-America Arts Alliance regional meeting. So thank you, Margie, for joining us, and it's your show.
Thank you, everybody. I'm just actually coming in from a committee meeting, so let me calm myself down. It's good to meet with you, and I think I have 10 minutes. Is that what I'm supposed to do, Adrian?
You have 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, I think I'll try to only talk 10 so people can talk back to me, or I can answer questions in the chat. Somebody is operating a couple of slides for me, I hope. Yeah. The question, as I understand it, that we're wanting to talk about for a few minutes this morning is about the why of inclusion, access, and diversity in the arts. And I'll just say a word about how this acronym DEIA can get changed around. I like to talk about the why first from the inclusion perspective, that in order for us to get to the kind of diversity and real tangible outcomes that we want to get to, we have to think about inclusion, first of all. And so what does that mean to the arts? We have so many different ways to talk about inclusion, and a lot of my arts organizational leaders and colleagues talk about outreach as their answer to inclusion. And I consider outreach to be sort of self-serving. It's programming in my mind that serves the goals of the organization. The community obviously does participate and benefit from those actions, but when we design inclusion work plans, we're often not considering how the community is receiving our gestures. So I'd like to think about inclusion first, And then access to the real resources that we have in the arts world, not just access to what we decide to allocate for access. Free tickets, for example, in some cases, people consider that to be access. But is that really providing a meaningful experience? And is free always the response that's needed? And then as we get through dissecting those two things, then we can really get to a conversation about diversity. The next slide is sort of the, I only have two, so bear with me. The next slide is, it starts to talk about the why. This is a quote from Langston Hughes that I love to use. And if we had more time and, at some point we can talk about this later. But it's a Langston Hughes quote that talks about, you've taken my blues and gone. You've co-opted my stories. You've taken my songs and turned them into operas. You've taken my young people and you've decided to teach them the more European-based and European-focused art forms, as opposed to teaching them that the real legacy and history of the African-American experience has resulted in some of our country's most unique art forms, like jazz and blues. And the quote is further sort of wrapping this up by saying the why. I have to have you understand why my stories are important to me, and that someday, those of us around this table will talk about the why from the stance of authentic cultural expression. And when people express themselves in ways that reflect their own identities, then we are able to get to the conversation about inclusion and access and diversity. And so the last slide, I feel like I'm talking really fast, is the why in summary for me. And it just seems like if our country's history, racially diverse history, we can talk about racially diverse, culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, gender diversity, all of the diversities that represent the people of this country. But in this case, we want to really be courageous enough to focus on race. If our racial diversity is not intentionally, thoughtfully planned, looked at from a budget allocation perspective, from who's sitting at the leadership table perspective, from programming, from marketing, how we engage the community, if we're not intentionally representing and reflecting our country's racial diversity in the arts sector, then this is what will happen in my mind. The generative nature, the way we continue to think about cultural identity in our programming, the generative nature of creativity will become stagnant and irrelevant. I like to tell the story about working with my now 30-year-old son, who is a computer geek. I was talking to him a few years ago about this idea of diversity in the arts. And he said to me, Mom, that word diversity is more important to your generation than it is to mine from a definition perspective. I'm more interested in diverse ideas and perspectives and thoughts so that I can bring my own cultural identity to the table and contribute to someone else's idea as much as I want them to contribute to mine. And so this idea about inclusion and diversity for this next generation of young leaders in the field is they're looking at how their racial identity brings new and fresh approaches to creativity, not necessarily to problem solving, although that is certainly a part of the work of the creative mind. But in summary, I would just like to open the conversation with this idea that if we don't do this kind of work, the way we look at spoken word, the way we look at new mural artists, graffiti artists, the way we look at the traditional art forms of every racial community and cultural community, not only will our creative heritage as a nation suffer, but our creative future will suffer. We could talk about the economics of this leaning into diversity. We can talk about the bottom line. If we don't diversify our audiences, they too will go away and die. But the way we have in this country contributed to being one of the world's most creative countries is by bringing the multiplicity of thoughts and experiences to the table. And so I just want to stop here and close the slide so I can see the faces. And again, I apologize for joining the conversation late. But if this is the way the conversations have been going, I would welcome some dialogue and questions with you about what I've just said.
All right, I'm going to jump in then. I was waiting to see if anybody else was going to. So Margie, first of all, it's delightful to get to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
You bet.
Margie and I have had a series of conversations that have been quite thrilling and in all different places. We've covered a bunch of states by now.
Yeah.
You know, one of the difficulties Lauren and I had spoken with earlier about the fear of getting it wrong. You know, and you're just like, oh my goodness, I could really get this wrong. And I'm so glad that everybody jumped into this conversation regardless, because I know I'm going to get stuff wrong. But when it comes to the arts, if we had one request to make that we hoped would be fulfilled, say, for example, we were in a boot camp and we were going to be actually making suggestions to legislators and talking with people all around the state. What would the request be? What is step one?
In terms of a funding request or?
Well, that's where I usually go, because without money, it's pretty tough to go to step two. So
yeah. I would say there's a phrase we use in the teaching artist profession, and it is engagement before knowledge. So before you ask for money, which is the ultimate, I would think about engaging with those men and women who are decision makers and talking with them about your understanding about public service. Public dollars are intended for the public benefit, that you as arts organizations will be coming back to them to talk about additional funding. But for this first conversation, you just want to talk about your goals. I would say before you ask for money, you have to engage with those decision makers. You know, to get a sense of their tolerance, to get a sense of their own understanding. I think sometimes we go for money before we know what the responder's temperature is about what we're asking for. And so I would say spend a little bit of time thinking about this strategically before you go ask for money. So engagement, knowledge before engagement, share with them, and then come back and make the ask. This is also making me think about this idea about getting it wrong. You know, I don't know how many of you are parents, but there was no textbook about parenting, right? You tried things, you listened to your children and to your family, you understood what traditionally had worked, like, you know, you're going to eat that broccoli or else you're going to sit at the table. You know, so we don't know what is right about this work. I say, in all due respect, that when I hear my colleagues in the field of the arts talk about getting it wrong, I say bullshit to that. Because there is no such thing as getting it wrong when you are in earnest moving forward. We all make mistakes in everything that we do in life, from paying too much for the loaf of bread when we go, you know, we make mistakes, but we still have to move and accomplish things. And if we're doing that openly and honestly, we will accept the mistakes. We will celebrate the things that we got right. And we will also learn how to talk to people without this guilt hanging over our heads. We've done a lot of things wrong in this country. We've also learned a lot, and we've done a lot of things right. And the things that we don't know, we ask people. We ask for guidance. We ask for suggestions. And so be fearless in this work. If you're gonna do it, don't go in like a lamb. You know, put your boots on and kick that can down the road and just keep going. There is no such thing as failure in this work. There's no such thing. You don't get to shrug your shoulders. You have to keep going. That's the commitment that it's going to take to bring about the kind of change in the area of inclusion and access that we're going to be required to do. Because I don't know how many of you have read The Art of War, but I take a lesson from that book. The enemy is expecting for you to quit. They're expecting for you to get exhausted. So you have to be prepared to go into battle after battle after battle. That's what I would say. You can't get it wrong.
And segue into that would be, you know, performative allyship. I know that's something that's been a trend amongst businesses. It covers a wide scope of behaviors. I mean, it's words, a practice of words, posts, gestures, but all it does is promote the individual or the company's own virtuous moral compass than actually helping the causes that they're intending to showcase. So like an example of that would be Blackout Tuesday. You know, I know you guys saw all that all over social media. It was muting oneself by posting a completely black square, right? But the origins of that were about music performance and dance industry under a tag that was called "The Show Must Be Paused." But it was supposed to be a solidifying thing with Black people, but the intentions behind the posts, I mean, some people had good intentions, but I think what they should have done was, like I said earlier, talk the talk, walk the walk. Where are you donating your money to? Are you donating to resources that are going to help Black and Indigenous individuals and businesses and companies? So places to donate, petitions to sign. That's just one of the examples that I've seen a lot of businesses partake in, and it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate your reference to that, Adrienne, if I may. The other thought that I have in that regard is to focus on the little things, friends. Focus on the little things. The big things will take care of themselves. Focus on how your job descriptions and job requirements for hiring are written, how those are exclusionary practices, requiring a degree that's not necessary to get the job done. Where you're recruiting, where you're posting those. Just we sent out an e-blast to the Association of, Arts Administrators of Color. That's terrific. But you know what? Pick up the phone, the little thing, and say, I have a job coming open. I have a job that's currently open. And what I need are you to help me identify some potential candidates. Little things. How are your board members selected? We don't need job shadowing, and we don't need board member shadowing programs. We need to talk to people. It's a little thing. Amazing what a conversation will do, and you can find out what people's skill sets are. So I think we're trying to, as you may have heard, I worked in West Africa for a long time. And one of the most important sayings was, you don't have to boil the ocean to make a pot of tea. Just take it one step at a time. The grandiose, let's do a national campaign around something or a citywide campaign. You can imagine what I call a whispering campaign will do. We're looking to diversify X. we're thinking about this kind of programmatic change. What do you think? You know, so listening to people, that also helps with your question earlier, Lenora, about, you know, getting it wrong. I think social media and social distancing has been helpful in many ways, but it's also limited us and prevented us from just strictly just having a conversation with somebody. I just want to share that I just presented to the Finance Committee of Mid-America an initiative that, you know, did take rocket science, but, you know, they're trying to diversify their staff, right? Okay, well, what kinds of jobs, you know, are the best, you know, what kinds of jobs do you have? And so ironically, I talked to the CFO of the organization who said, well, I don't know what role I would play in DEIA. I said, well, you don't have to play a role, first of all, but you do hire accountants and you hire finance people. So are you recruiting? You know, every historically Black college and university that I'm aware of has an accounting program. And those students need jobs. And many of them have experiences in cultural expression that they don't call it arts, maybe. But if you're looking for an accountant, you have to go where the accountants are, where they're coming from. You don't have to go look for a Black accountant, but you could. Right? So you want someone that has the expertise. In business schools and deans of business schools want their kids, their students, their graduates to have jobs. So I think sometimes we overthink this work. You know, Black people have been on this planet since the beginning of time. And we don't need to be coddled. You don't have to worry about embarrassing. You don't have to worry about saying the wrong thing because we've been through a whole lot of stuff. If you come to us and say, here's what my goal is, here's what I'm trying to solve, you'd be amazed. But I think on the other side of the fence, I talk to a whole lot of white people in my life because I don't need to talk to, you know, some people I don't need to talk to, they already get it. So I think we also have to understand that part of our job as people of color is to be prepared to not do the performative allyship, but to be allies authentically and to let's think about this together. It's a conversation that I'm having with the young emerging leaders of color across the country, that just as you expect people to understand your position, we should have the expectation that we'll need to understand theirs as well.
Well, one of the things that I would just love, since we've not heard from a lot of people, I do talk to a lot of people who in one-on-one conversations, and thank you so much, Margie, for your words and for taking the time to be here with us, who are so afraid about saying the wrong word, the wrong thing. And I really think it's important that when somebody comes to me as a person of color, don't think I've got the answers just because I'm a person of color. And that's so much the power of a conversation to have, I think, too, because I see so many times with the performative side of things, I question our legislature, for example, a lot about why don't we have more people, more representative folks working for us or getting contracts and that kind of thing. And generally, as Margie kind of alluded to, or just said outright, it's because we do something like a y'all come. Anybody can apply for this. And I say over and over and over again, y'all come does not work. Because if somebody, in Podunk just put out something to you and you've never been to Podunk and nobody's ever included you in, in the morning breakfast, and you put out a y'all come, that's probably not something you're going to do. So the power of that conversation, that intimacy of honoring and learning something from people on an individual level, even I think it's really, really striking. So I'd like us to just take a chance and hear from some people about what are the challenges you think we face? And I don't think this needs to be from just Black folks on the screen. what are some challenges you think we might face with our project here of equity and the whole DEIA chapter that we're going to face? For example, if somebody, do you think about art beyond the traditional thing? That's a big, big one, because so many of so many of the younger folks don't have their art recognized because it doesn't fit into that traditional type box. And I'll really be glad when we get away from even needing to use the word traditional or anything else and just call it art, because I have yet to for somebody to just say to me, if I were to ask, what is art? I mean, who knows the answer to that question? I don't know. Just we can, it's kind of like one of those things, we know it when we see it, but we have to be open enough to see it. And when somebody's telling you this is my art, do we listen if it looks like something that we are not used to? Who will go with that person and make the case that this that you think is not art is a possibility for changing our entire county or changing our state? And that who is going to step up with the person who's not been heard or been recognized and be that real ally? Yeah.
Joyce, I just think what you just said is profound. And it's because we have to be intentional about what we would like to see. You know, we know what it looks like when we go on vacation and we go to an area of town that has been revitalized, and you see murals on the wall, diverse restaurants, different people serving you, and it's all clicking together. We know what that collaborative vibrancy looks like. And it includes the arts. The arts become the glue. The chefs that make the creative menus, the cocktail that we love to have, to the chairs you sit in. You've been to that area of town and you say, oh my goodness, this is unique. But it is that area has been intentional about its economic impact, its inclusion to its people, the creativeness, open to the creative thinking and architecture, construction, all of it comes together. So I think this discussion of diversity and inclusion and access has to be intentional. And how do we put out those goals and say, here's what we want to see? And we include all people to be able to get it done. So, and I think the Arkansas for the Arts is just poised to do that. We've got eight regions. We've got examples like Northwest Arkansas and all across the state. We have pockets of these examples, but how do we build on it and get our legislatures to say, I want more of that?
You said the key word, intentional. I mean, it has to come from the top so that it can trickle down to the bottom, right? We have to look around the room at the top and see everybody here should not be looking alike. We should have representation. And so you said the key word is intentional. We have to make that effort and be intentional in our decisions when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to allyship. We have to be intentional about that.
I think, Jean, the other thing that I would add to your comments, and somebody just put in the chat a note about recruiting people to the area.
Yes, my niece talked to somebody yesterday. I'm looking for a beach house in Perdido Key, Florida, and I think there were 8 that y'all had that sort of met the criteria that I was looking for.
I think he's on a different call.
Hey.
Oh,
okay.
I want to be on the beach, the cottage. Sorry, I've got a Zoom call.
Can you
want to be at the beach too?
Oh Lord, I'm so sorry.
That's okay, but we want to be where you want to go. So
well, I've got to go to a wedding. I'm so sorry. I've got
That's
3
right.
Conversations. Obviously, I apologize.
Just mute us if you want to. That's fine. For us.
Now he made us jealous. He's going to the beach. He's got to take off now.
But Jean, the thing that you made me think about that I wanted to put out there for a minute to talk about is this idea about cultural sustainability.
Mm.
And, you know, we do see those communities that you were referencing when we go visit, where cultural traditions still exist in authentic forms. When you go to the county fair, I don't know about you, but I really want to go buy something that's homemade and handmade.
Mhm.
And the men and women creating those products don't call themselves artists, do they? They're tradition bearers. They're sustaining culture. They're teaching and passing along. And so we do have to broaden our understanding of the definition of what cultural expression is. A big old bucket. And the brilliant work that has been done some years ago now, you know, in countries like Denmark and Australia, you know, that talk about the why the creative sector must include those tradition bearers and attracting people to their cities. So if we all just keep going to see the new thing, the synthesis of lots of things, we want that. Young people are creating new ideas, but they lean into the traditions. And I don't care what art form you're looking at, whether it's fabric design or architecture, they lean into the cultural traditions of a people in creating this innovative and new thing. So I do think it's also important that legislators understand that the traditions, the signature of our city or our state or our region could go away and disappear if it is not practiced, continuously practiced and taught. And the art is a vehicle for doing that. How many nutcrackers do you need to see? But you keep seeing them, don't you? It's because we want to keep that tradition alive. When I ran the Cultural Affairs Department in LA, y'all, went to 30 nutcrackers a year. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I can't. Yeah. But it's because we do recognize that European art forms are sustained.
Right.
And people go to the ballet every year. It's every dance school in the country does it. So why are we shying away from the celebrations during Juneteenth is coming up, right? Or the celebrations of jazz and of gospel music and of the Cajunto Festival in South Texas. So I do think we owe our elected officials a chance to educate them. We owe them that. They're public service, but they don't come with knowledge about everything. To talk to them about the vibrancy of a region rests in the traditions of its people. And that young people then springboard forward based on those traditions to create new and innovative work. And I think we have to spend some time thinking about that and how do we communicate that from an economic standpoint or job creation, whatever the buzz is, you know, that they're focused on. It's not something we have to beat them over the head with. I talk about cultural memory to elected officials.
Margie, that's excellent, because I had never thought of it in terms of cultural sustainability and expression as a means to vibrancy, but you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. Thank you so much.
If I can add something to that, first, thank you everyone for your comments, and hi, Adrienne, on the board of my organization. But I think it's really crucial, especially for legislators, to hear about artists as whole people, not just as culture standard bearers or traditional, memory keepers. They're also people who need access to healthcare. They need solid jobs. They need renters' rights and protections. If we're talking about true inclusivity and sustainability and creating places where that creative vitality can exist, we have to recognize that artists have specific concerns that are not just specific to them as artists, but they're, those are concerns translate across lots of different communities. But we can't just expect artists to create this vitality and this sense of place in a vacuum without any sustainability in their own lives and careers. So I'm just always trying to make sure people remember that, you know, we can't just say, here's a wall, put up a mural. We also need to make sure these people have, you know, the money and the protection and the health and the lodging that they need. So.
Yeah, for example, we don't, in the legislature, I mean, I want to puke to even use, you know, this comparison, but it's real. If some company right now in Taiwan said we're going to, we'd like to come to pick a place and here are the things we need to be there. And it becomes millions and sometimes billions of dollars. Guess what we do? We turned over heaven and hell to make sure, we can call them incentives or whatever we call them. But if it's something we want, something that we value, we have specific legislation and specific mechanisms to make sure they can be sustained through that whole process of getting everything set up. And much of it goes, you know, even into years. And that's nothing more than what Sarah was just saying about, you know, sustaining the artists. We've got to talk to folks about this being something that should be valued. The only reason right now we're trying to recreate some of the cultural things in our lives is because they were not valued enough in the first place to be maintained. And so now here we are trying to recreate, and that's really a good lesson for us now, I think, to see what is there and and have other folks, not just legislators to legislators, kind of as Margie indicated, talking to legislators about what this means in terms of growing and inclusiveness, and also how it needs to be sustained. The same way if you know, some company said we're going to come here, but we need not to have to pay taxes for the next 50 years. And we go, yeah, whatever. And we need the land already there and appropriated for us. And we do everything we can to go get the land. And that's the same kind of thing we need to apply then maybe to folks who need to get started and need to be sustained. But I think I have two colleagues on here, and Les, my co-chair. The thing that we run into is needing your help in talking to legislators. That's just a fact of life, because when somebody mentioned earlier about nobody's asking to be coddled, but that so many times when it comes to anything about DEIA, that seems to be what we are getting from particularly policymakers. And when the first thing flies out of somebody's mouth is, well, but we want to be sure that people are, if it's a position, say the accountant, well, we want to be sure, you know, we're getting people who are prepared and people who are experts, or even worse, we don't want to lower, people will say things like, we don't want to lower our expectations. And what you've just said, when people say things like that, it like splits my soul, because what you basically said is necessarily for DEIA, we have to talk about whether or not the person is qualified, but not the other way around. And so these are things I think that are real, that we need to have conversations about, you know, and your being a part of that conversation with legislators is just crucial. It just cannot be people of color. That is the major thing who's putting it out there, because God knows they're used to me. So it's almost as if I don't know what else I have to contribute. But I know we have this vision, we see this, we know what it can mean, but we just have to be intentional about how do we sit down, how do we get serious about it? And how do we get ally in a way where we're not going to let people break us apart? And how do we stand each other up when, say, if you are, I'll just say the white man or whoever in a case, because it is just a fact in our legislatures, like the world, that there is where so much of the power is, but we need to hear all voices. When things become uncomfortable and you see folks who look just like you, and same thing for me, could be doing something to somebody else. Am I going to accept the uncomfortability to say, no, we have to stay on this road? And you might have to say that to your friends. But I think that's the kind of thing it's going to take to make this real for us. So.
Well, I'm going to jump in, Joyce.
Okay.
sorry that I'm still technologically behind without my face on the screen, but this is Les Warren. And I have loved working with Senator Joyce Elliott. I'm a Republican white male, and we've done great together. And one of the things that I will tell you, I'm thankful to be in Hot Springs. I'm thankful to be in Arkansas because I think the arts are something that my community and my state appreciate. And I love the fact that there's a lot of emphasis being put on the arts. I love finding that person that is unknown that we can get behind, or that, as Jean was referencing, that unique restaurant or business that comes to our community. And I know that there's always going to be negatives out there, but it's groups like ours that have got to be the positives. We have got to be the ones that don't let the negatives hold us down. And we're the ones that come behind these new artists and new venues, and we support them, and we get people with us to support them. And Joyce is so on target when she says that you have got to talk to your legislators, because when legislators hear a lot of noise from their constituents, you bet they go back to the Capitol and they're saying, hey, I've got a lot of people who are wanting me to support this. Or, I mean, you know, we've got the Waltons in Arkansas who are strong behind the arts. I mean, we've got a lot of things going for us in Arkansas, but we've got to be vocal on what we need. And then we've got to, and I guess I'm an idealist, but I think we have to individually do the support and sometimes be the workers when there aren't many other workers in the field at the time, but persevere to help those new artists, new venues continue to go until they pick up the speed. And then until we pick up, I've loved going across the state with Senator Elliott and seeing all the different areas of the state with their different artists and different types of venues, and learning what I didn't know about Arkansas. So, and you know, I'll just say this, my God doesn't see color or differences. And that's the way I choose to look at people. And I'm going to work with people. And I hate it when I see people mistreated because of a difference. So I'm just going to keep doing the positive things that I can to help us continue to move forward with what we are doing. And I'll fight the negatives and move forward with the positives. And I appreciate every one of you on this call. And we'll just keep moving Arkansas forward.
Thank you. I just want to quickly say, I just put a resource in the chat that might be helpful in building your advocacy, language, and work. It is the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act, 1965. It's a congressional act. The first line of the act, I teach this to my public policy students. The first line says, the arts and the humanities belong to all of the people of the United States. So if that's our biggest umbrella, it took how many years of legislation to get it right? Wow. It came right on the heels of the Civil Rights Act, which we're still trying to make sure that it stays alive. But this is a national congressional act. And so the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and we used to have a President's Committee on the Arts, I think it's coming back. Those agencies must follow this legislation. And so read it, it's a one-pager, send it to your elected officials ahead of time. It is some beautiful language about the intersection of science, I even talked to my students how support for the arts for all the people is written into the Declaration of Independence. So we're not just new to this game,
Right.
talking about arts advocacy. It's a part of our country's founding documents. And so with that, I will be quiet. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margie. I mean, I think you wrapped it up quite nicely. You know, this is a conversation that has to keep going, but unfortunately we have to end the call. But I want to thank everybody for sharing your morning with us. Thank you to Senator Elliott, Representative Warren, Representative McCullough for joining us on the call. And also feel free to contact the Arkansans for the Arts if you need to connect with any of us, and hope that you all have a great day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.